What's up, everybody? This is Theology in the Dirt. We want to practice our theology in the public square of our homes, our city, and our world. You can get sermon notes, links to the rest of our podcasts at theologyinthedirt.com. My name is Mitchell Jolly.
And I'm Chris Hayes.
Yo, man, what's good, Chris?
Not the Braves right now.
Horrible.
Bus. On the flip side, Kirby Smart's recruiting going good.
Dude, he's on fire.
I tell you, I've been rewatching one of my favorite all-time shows. You ever watch Lost?
Yes. Oh, my gosh.
So I love Lost. One of my, top 5, maybe top 3 shows of all time. It's probably the 5th or 6th, 7th rewatch of the whole series.
Yeah, the ending ruined it for me, though, man.
See, I disagree. I think the ending is perfect, but a lot of people think the ending is bad because they think they were dead the whole time, which is not true. So if you understand the ending a little bit better,
you may need to educate me then, man.
Well, everything that happened is real. They even say that in the finale. Jack's dad says, no, everything that happened to you is real. The ending where they're in the church is basically a gathering place where they meet together before they pass on after they've all died later on, like in life. But everything that happened. So
I'm going to have to go back and watch it again.
You need to go back and watch it.
Oh, my gosh. Like, really?
There's a lot, ironically, now it's not by no means a Christian show, but there are a lot of, like, theological, religious ties in.
My mind's blown. I don't even know if I can do the podcast now.
That's it. But the number one reason people don't like the ending is because
how did I miss that?
They're like, we got there and they were all dead the whole time. Nope, that's not true. Even the show writers and producers have confirmed that. So, I think if you rewatch it under that pretense, you'll find the finale is actually one of the better finales in shows in history.
The Office is number 1.
Yeah, that's hard to beat The Office. Yeah, Friends, I think, is perfect. Big Bang Theory, perfect.
Well, I'm going to have to go rewatch
Breaking Bad ending is really good.
Because it was incredible. Yeah, Breaking Bad was awesome.
I didn't mean to go that long into the show, but I really enjoyed, probably more so than the last few times rewatching Lost. So.
I like it. Well, hey, just want to say our students were at camp last week. We've been going to this camp since the mid-2000s, and it's Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters. Talk about what's good. And I just had this thought. I said this to somebody the other day. I said, man, do you take your kids to Snowbird for we do our retreats. We do summer camp there. So we're at Snowbird, and we have adults. We have men that go to the men's conference, women go to the women's conference, couples that go to the marriage conferences at Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters. They've been friends and partners for a long time. Brody Holloway, Spencer, Rob, all the guys up there, man, Hank Parker Jr., just the whole crew, and then staff. My 2 oldest work there. Gabe is in his 4th summer at Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters, his last one before he'll be moving on. John Mark's in his 2nd. They both guide the river and the Nantahala River for campers and invest and disciple and all the good stuff there. And so I just want to say, if you're not doing Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters as a student minister, are you even discipling? It's like, you got to go Google Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters, and if you're going to get a summer camp, you got to be online and ready to register at midnight the day it opens, before registration opens, because it fills up in about 24 hours. I call it 11 weeks. But fall retreats, winter retreats, man, get your kids, get your adults to Snowbird, man. You won't go wrong.
It's nice that you dressed up like a Snowbird Instagram ad today.
I swear, I wasn't even thinking about that, but I got my Snowbird hat. I got my Snowbird
They do have
summer
great
staff.
swag, too. I'll give them that. Shout out to whoever does their design and their swag work there.
Yeah.
But I need to get me some new updated stuff.
But. Yeah, the shirt with a Bigfoot on it is one of my favorites this year. It's awesome. And final thing is what's good for me, man, is I love the fact that the Sean Ryan Show, one of the maybe the number 2 podcast that's out there on YouTube and Spotify is the Sean Ryan Show. He just had Sarah Adams on for the 2nd time. She's a CIA targeter. Benghazi, she wrote a book on Benghazi, fascinating. But they spent some time talking about our friend Ryan Corbett. And so you can go to freeryancorbett.com. Ryan has been now in prison by the Taliban, and as Sarah, she dropped some major information about them. So I just encourage you to go. I just want to warn you, if you're like a Christian that's not used to anything salty, this is going to be offensive to you, because you're talking about 2 a SEAL, retired SEAL, former CIA operator, and then a CIA targeter. And it's not like the language is going to be salty, so you have to suck it up and deal with it. But if you want to find out some information about our friend that's coming from reputable sources, people on the inside, you kind of know how to pray. And so I encourage you to go check it out. The Sean Ryan Show. It's my favorite podcast. I love the Sean Ryan Show. I'm fascinated with what the Lord's doing in his life. He's been a Christian for just a year, and he's working out his salvation with fear and trembling, and I appreciate that. And so love that. So anyway, Sean Ryan Show, Sarah Adams' most recent episode that dropped this week, you learn about Ryan Corbett. So with that said, it's time, my friend, to shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
Shake and bake. Shake and then bake. Shake and bake.
Shake and bake.
It's shake and bake time. Shake and bake, buddy. Shake it before you bake it.
It's time to get after it. Well, today we're going to come after the question, what are we supposed to do with Donald Trump? So this is recent, and we're in election cycle. We've been talking about this whole season, this election cycle. We're doing episodes on how Christians engage, right? We're talking about Christian political engagement. And the reality is we're going to have three options on the ballot this year. It's going to be Joe Biden, Donald Trump, and RFK Jr. And the question for so many of us is, what are we supposed to do with Donald Trump? So as if you're living under a rock and are unaware, former president, 45, was found guilty of 34 felony charges. Now, we're probably going to get into the reality that trial is a sham. I think it's a setup. Even Democrats are recognizing, it's questionable, right? The truth of the matter is also in the trial, non-relevant information just to smear the man. He is immoral. He's not a moral man.
Right.
His family seems to love him, but he certainly comes off as he tweets mean things. Probably needs to keep his mouth shut. There are things about him that are vile. And the question for us is, for a lot of folks in this election cycle, what do Christians do? Because there are camps, and we'll talk about this later, but there are camps that answer that question that inside the faith, right? I'm talking about Christians. Yeah. That seem to be at odds with each other and with the practice of actually what to do. And do you vote for the man, or do you vote for a third party, or do you not vote at all? Do you write a name in? And it leaves oftentimes me, I'm just confessing, me feeling judged, and at the same time me turning around and judging people inappropriately. And so it makes me want to go, okay, what are we supposed to do? Because I think it's not as clear from the biblical text what we ought to do. I think some people can allude to various things in the scriptures, or maybe even quote things or even misquote things that they think gives them a clear directive to do one thing or the other. And I don't think it's that clear.
Right.
Each believes the other is wrong and are probably actively judging each other. I don't think either of those are appropriate. So I think there are some things we need to talk about. So Chris, what do you think? Give me your thoughts, your feedback, and then I'll come back and share a couple of big ticket items, and then we'll end up with some Hayes takeaways, and then you guys give us your feedback.
Yeah, I want to get into the trial just a little bit if we can, because I know not a lot of people understand the conviction, but don't understand why people are calling it a sham.
Right.
And so, but the irony first off here is that Trump can still run for president. He can become president, and he can even execute the presidency as a convicted felon, and even if he goes to jail, which I think is fascinating, not in a good way, but fascinating.
Right.
But he won't be able to cast a vote in the election.
That's wild. He can't vote for himself.
Can't. So if he loses by one vote, that'll be interesting. But I'm sure there'll be a few tens of thousands that pop up last minute from
Thankfully, it's electoral college. It won't come down to a single vote. Thank God.
So just let's dive in real quickly into where things get weird and to prove that certainly something fishy is going on, besides the fact that just New York just hates Trump altogether. But let's start with Judge Juan Merchan. How he became to be the judge on this case. So there are 24 sitting judges who were supposed to be randomly selected from. It's like a pool of 24 judges that were supposed to be randomly selected from to preside over this case. Now, Judge Merchan was not even on that list to begin with. He was not even an option out of those 24.
No
He's
way.
an acting judge who he's also a Biden donor, a significant Biden donor. He's also donated to organizations like Stop Trump. Yet somehow, not being in that pool, was chosen to preside, get this, not only over the Trump hush money case, but he also presided over the Trump organization fraud case and the Steve Bannon case. All these are related to Trump. It's pretty much statistically impossible.
Completely chance.
That an acting judge, that even one judge out of the acting pool would be chosen for all three of those, much less one not chosen at all, who also happens to be an adamant, vehement anti-Trump person. So somehow he gets in there, and furthermore, he'll be single-handedly deciding the sentencing on the case, right? So the jury convicted, which I would trust it more if it wasn't a unanimous jury vote to begin with, but the fact that it's like,
what was are you going to cover, are you talking about the whole thing where he said 4, 4, and 4? Like you could get a 4 guilty, 4 not guilty, 4 undecided and still convict with that?
I don't have much on that, but the fact that they were...
How is that possible?
That all 34 counts were unanimous is, not
That's
likely.
Funky. Right.
The max for him is 4 years in jail per count. So if the judge lays down the maximum possible sentence, it would be 136 years in prison, which I imagine Trump would be like, it's the greatest sentence than ever. He would use that as a positive. But
been sentenced to more time than anybody ever in the history of the world.
Now, most legal experts I've heard from don't believe that the judge is going to give him jail time.
Okay.
He's a first-time offender. It's not. I'm not saying it's not a serious crime or anything, but it's compared to other things, it's not overly serious to the point where they expect jail time. But still, the fact that this judge gets to choose the sentencing all on his own is not great here.
Are you going to talk about what the actual crime is, or the crimes?
So, shortly, basically, he paid hush money to a porn star named Stormy Daniels and covered up the payment he lied about it and documented it as legal fees paid to his attorney.
Right. And some of that is related to his 2016 campaign finances, too, in regard to use of those, right?
Right.
Okay.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that he's innocent of anything. That's not my point here. I don't think either of us are saying that. The point was the whole trial itself was clearly a weaponization of the judicial system by the left, by the Democratic Party and those in power, to try to get him off. Because they're not trying to just make it easier for Biden to beat him. They're trying to get him off the ballot altogether. It's 100% because everything points to him winning right now.
Right.
So I don't, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time there, but I thought it was important to at least address that because I think that's, number one, this is a dangerous precedent. Number one, granted, we don't have much precedent of a active presidential candidate even being considered for this.
Right.
But I also think if you're going to do this, you got to go back and look at some other past presidents' dealings as well. You can't just do it one way. Yeah,
and if you're setting the precedent going forward, that means every sitting president, either in office, like if he is, if he's impeached, which is basically get yelled at on paper, basically like how many presidents should be prosecuted after their term, right?
Right.
So I can't even begin to imagine. Yeah.
So the crazy thing here, though, is despite that, what's happening is a lot of the results from this have backfired on the Democratic Party. So what's happening is lots of Democrats are leaving the party and changing their vote and position. This is including like governors and senators who have just said, I've had enough. Now, to be clear, both of us are not believers in the two-party system. Certainly not right now. I don't. Right. Both of them are complete messes. Trump himself saw an approval rating and polls in his favor jump 6 to 10 points in less than 24 hours after the conviction.
Right.
And in the 10 hours following the ruling, his campaign received $52.8 million in support. All in all, the Trump campaigns received $141 million in donations just from the month of May.
Wow. And
again, many experts are believing that this is actually a benefit to him winning the election as opposed to a detriment, which I think is, again, I'm using the word fascinating loose, but just from it's mind-boggling that you could be convicted on 34 felonies, regardless of the legitimacy of the case.
Right.
And that makes you a better presidential candidate.
Right.
But that's where we are. So I shared that to say, because I think we're kind of, the whole point is, what do we do with him, particularly as Christians?
Yeah. Because our options are limited, which we can talk about that.
Right.
Our options are limited.
Number one, the thing that's really bothered me is seeing all the posts on social media of comparing Trump to Jesus. Like, well, Jesus was convicted too. Or Nelson Mandela. Another one said MLK was a convicted felon. Yeah, Nelson Mandela. There's all these like comparisons. The savior syndrome by believers on Trump, I think is dangerous and it's disgusting.
Yeah. Can we just stop comparing Trump to Jesus like that? Like, let's not do that. That's absolutely horrendous. Not the same at all, and it's a massive overreach to compare Trump to Jesus like that. Makes my skin crawl.
There are things that he will stand for as a sitting president that I believe in.
Sure,
but it's just cringeworthy, the evangelicals pedestal raising of a man who's not worthy of that. 100%. But that's where we get to the point of, right. And I think we discussed this before. Like, how do we separate that? It's an internal. It's almost turmoil. Like, there's this battle going in. I'll be honest with our listeners. I'm going to vote for him. I'm just going to, because number one, I want to afford groceries again. And I want to, I believe in the sanctity of life. I'm not saying he necessarily does, but under his presidency, we saw some great movement in that area.
He's the first sitting president to actually physically, in person, attend a March for Life rally. Mm-hmm. Other presidents who say they're pro-life never attended in person. He attended in person, spoke at, and under his presidency, we saw the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, I don't like that he's kind of coming out on a middle stance now, so it's throwing it back to the states to decide. No, the bottom line issue there is murdering a child, and that's what it is. Let's just be honest. From conception to death, humans only produce humans. Squirrels produce squirrels. Deer produce deer. Elephants produce elephants. Humans produce humans. So from conception, and we talked about this on the IVF episode, from conception all the way to death, we're talking about an image bearer of God, and to take a middle stance on that position, I think is completely sacrificing the sanctity of human life. Because the bottom line is there are far too many ways for a woman and a man to not create a human, to then put the responsibility of death on the child who did nothing wrong. Like, don't have sex, number one. Use contraception, number two. There are 100 ways to not get pregnant. Mm-hmm. And so killing a child because people can't control themselves and make better decisions is horrible. And so I don't care who they are, whether it's RFK, Biden, or Trump. If you can't stand on that, I almost said I almost got I agree. Like, at least he's done more than anybody, but I don't like the fact that he's backing off. I'm like, no, stand your ground, man. Right. Fight for something that matters. But anyway, okay.
But I know what the other side is going to do. So that's.
They're pro-murder.
I don't like either, but
yeah, absolutely.
And I also don't believe the argument in like, well, they're just going to go into foster care. They might get abused, or they might have. That's not an argument for murder.
Yeah, no, it's not an argument for murder at all. Like, you can't justify you can't justify murdering someone who's innocent by some down the line possibility or probability. You can't do that. Right. As Christians, we don't have the luxury of doing that. And here's the deal: RFK. I was really kind of rooting for RFK, and then on a podcast a few weeks ago, it's been about a month ago, he flat out advocated for abortion up to birth, and I was like, well, no, never gonna get my vote. I love so many things he stands for, but no, I'm not gonna vote for the man. Can't do it. Mm-hmm. Won't do it.
So getting back to that and really talking about Trump, because there's going to be Christians who vote for Trump. There's going to be Christians who vote for RFK. There's going to be Christians who vote for Biden, and people are entitled to vote however they want to. But just strictly from a Christian standpoint, like, I don't know how to encourage people. It's so hard to deal with this. Like, it's hard. Like, I don't like the fact that I'm going to vote for this man, and I think part of the problem is there's too much going on in our world where we're putting people's identity in their political party of choice or their candidate. Like, if you vote for this person, that means you support them, you're behind them, you agree with everything they do, you're okay with them being a felon, which is a horrible narrative, and it's not accurate, I don't think, of anybody really. But that tends to be the prevailing wind. And so, I know you've got some good points here. So I'm curious to hear some of your stance on all this. And
here's the deal. I'm gonna go ahead and play my hand. I'm gonna tell you, I'm not gonna vote third party. I'm not voting RFK, and I'm not voting Biden, and I'm not gonna not vote. Yeah. And so for me, it's gonna. I'm having to censor myself.
Right.
My central nervous system has shot off, like lid flipped. The bottom line is, I just play my hand. I'm going to vote for Trump.
Yeah.
And I know I have dear friends, close people who advocate for a different position, and you're welcome to judge me. I don't think they will. There are some people who will. They're going to judge you. They're going to judge me. But here's the question I have in this. If someone is a never Trump guy, gal, person, and it's for theological reasons, okay? We're Christians. It's theology in the dirt, right? My question is, what is the expected outcome? Are we hoping that because we don't vote, and I know people are going to throw out the lesser of two evils example, but I don't think that works, because that's just not how our system. This is the government God has set us under. If we're going to look at the sovereignty of God, Romans 13, He has placed us under a constitutional republic in which, regardless of whether we like the two-party system or not, God has seen fit to give us three options to vote for.
Yeah.
Now, if we believe the sovereignty of God, it's God who put those three there. And somehow in all this, He's going to work it out to put one of them as the President of the United States. So if we think by either not voting or writing in a vote for the sake of not advocating for a candidate who's immoral, are we thinking that God is going to cause whoever gets elected to rule righteously anyway? Maybe. But here's my point is, there's no correlation in Scripture to support that. Like, there were times where you had a good king in Israel and still things went sideways. And so the bottom line is, number one, you can't correlate the monarchy of Israel to a representational democratic republic today. There's no correlation between those two. So I guess my question is, by either not voting or voting for writing in a vote, I get that and I've said this before, and I think I'm critiquing myself, is like, I don't want to violate my conscience for voting for somebody like that. Then, okay, but what's the outcome? And if the outcome is somebody worse getting into office, what's the point? Because the end of the day is there is a practice that is going to happen over a 4-year period of time. There's a shifting that's going to take place. And it's either going to be what we've had for 4 years, which is horribly, you're talking about the gender issues that have been trumpeted as good and normal. You're going to have the terrible economic policy. You have the shoving down your throat of an agenda that is completely opposite of a Christian worldview, all because he's an immoral man, in spite of the fact that his policies fit better for the benefiting of an entire society. It doesn't make sense to me. Yeah. But since we have a government, though, of checks and balances, and we do, we have executive, legislative, and judicial branches of government, to refuse to vote for somebody whose policy is better, but they might be morally questionable, is to ignore the reality that two other branches of government might prevent the Lord's blessing also.
Yeah.
Right? If we're thinking like a refusal to vote for a presidential candidate is going to garner the blessing of God, we're ignoring the fact that we also vote for representatives and are allowing somebody else to come into the presidency who will put people in the judicial pipeline who are completely opposite of the person we refuse to vote for. So is God going to bless that decision when there are two other branches of the government that are completely off the rails too?
Yeah,
I don't think so.
Right.
That logic for me doesn't stack up. And again, it's not like Congress is brimming with ethical holiness. It's not like they're not scoundrels on the Supreme Court of the United States of America.
Right.
So it doesn't make sense to withhold a vote from a better candidate just because they do immoral things in hopes that we can get some practical good accomplished for the good of everyone in our country, because God might bless the fact that I refuse to cast my vote for somebody. Now, please feel free to critique me on that. Please feel free to point out my error in that. But it just doesn't make sense.
Well, also that assumes that the other candidate is moral and of good character, and I think that's clearly not the case.
Yeah.
So then if you've got two immoral people, right. And I'm not trying to dismiss RFK, but I just don't think there's any way that he's remotely close to.
I think he's going to absolutely. I think he's going to take votes from Biden, and I think it'll come down between Trump and RFK. I could be 100% wrong, but I think a lot of liberals are going to go RFK as opposed to Biden. A lot of the Hollywood elite are going RFK because he's so pro-choice. But I don't know.
And that may be the case, but I don't know enough about him, but we know what he stands on that. So let's just assume that none of these are overly great moral character, high character people. He might be, but the problem is we can't say I'm anti one guy when we have a history of that. So then it gets to the point of, well, if let's assume that both are immoral, then we're voting based off of policy at that point.
Gotta be.
And there's one, and again, that's not that one is perfect, because I think there's going to be flaws in Trump's policies. He wasn't a perfect president when he was here, but if I start going down the list of what both have done, and like we talked about earlier, one of the rare times in history we have a history to look at. I mean, we can look at 2 4-year terms, one for each candidate as president, and say, well, what do they do? I mean, it's just like, let's look at the baseball card, right? It's like, I know this guy's going to do this, right? Because that's what his history tells me. And so I think the struggle for me is like, part of me wants to separate my spiritual beliefs from voting, because I feel like it's hard to cast a vote for someone who acts certain ways and who does certain things immorally or against just my Christian beliefs.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I can separate it. And so, but I'm also not a believer of, and if you're I'm just not going to vote person, that's fine. I'm not judging people who don't cast a vote at all. You have that right not to. Mm-hmm. I just don't. I feel like for me, because I'm also the leader of my family, right? And so I've also got to make choices of what's going to be best for my family, what's going to be better for my daughter, you know, things like that. How am I going to survive financially? What's the economy looking like? Can I afford to buy gas? There's just so many different things that I have to vote on that may not be laid out in Scripture, and so that it's a struggle. Yeah. But I have to. That for me, that's kind of where I have to go. I have to say, well, these are all important decisions because they're part of the system that I live in. Yeah,
they are, and we're not Gnostics. And so if you don't know what Gnostic is, go look up Gnosticism. It's a lot more complicated than what I'm about to say, but this is a nice summary. Basically, physical things bad, spiritual stuff good. So therefore, that bleeds over into theologically the idea that Jesus was really never physical. He was only a spirit. You get some really weird, like 2nd century Gnostic gospels, and that's the reason they're not in the canon, because they weren't written by eyewitnesses, and they contain the full-blown heresy of Gnosticism. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, for whatever reason, there are lots of reasons. That could be a whole other podcast, but we are naturalists who are very Gnostic in our concept of salvation and Christian practice. Like we see our salvation as being only spiritual, going to heaven, escaping the earth, escaping this life, which is totally anti-Bible. The Bible's understanding of heaven is it's a renewed heaven, a recreated, a transformed earth. The universe is made whole. It escapes the curse of rebellion and sin, and we physically dwell on this earth with no sin, present with the Lord forever, with real physical bodies, because the Bible never presents this idea that we're just spiritual, we're just physical. We're this mashup of unseen realities and seen realities. And so when we come to things like this, we're very Gnostic in our voting, in that the practical stuff, the physical stuff doesn't matter. Only the spiritual stuff. And I'm like, no, they both matter. Like it matters that our leadership is moral. Mm-hmm. But it also matters that they have some manner of policy governance that benefits humanity. Right. And when you're forced to look at what is in front of us. There is a policy that is anti-humanity. I don't care how anybody, like I'm just going to say, I don't know how anybody with any kind of biblical worldview can justify a vote for Biden, because the whole idea of supporting LGBTQ plus sexual surgeries to transition girls to boys, boys to girls, this whole idea that we can work anti-human, and if it's anti-human, it's anti-God. Because God is for the human. He wants to restore humanity. And anything working against that is anti-God.
Yeah.
And into the policies that are feeding this idea of Mother Earth as opposed to good stewardship of physical creation is anti-God. Because and so all that to say is we can't be Gnostic in our voting, in that I'm only concerned about the spiritual realities. What about the physical realities? What about humanity? What about economics? What about social order and social life? And the truth of the matter is, I think you look at both of those candidates, or all three of them, it narrows it down to two that have some decent policies that help humans.
Yeah.
And out of those two, at least for me, I cannot vote for a guy who's willing to execute a child up to the point of birth. Never going to do that. And so it leaves me with one option that has a better set of policies physically to govern the public square better. And I just think, God, that makes so much sense, Chris.
It does. It kind of. So let me ask you this, because I think there's, and I've just seen this and heard this, so I know it's out there. There's a group of believers scattered around that have this sense of we trust in the sovereignty of God, so who cares, right? Like it doesn't matter. We're all going to be fine. And well, I can at least understand a little bit of that, because that's to say, like, well, if Biden wins, well, yes, God's still in control, and we can claim that. But I still think there's a responsibility that we have, as some of that responsibility is just out of citizens of the country.
Yeah.
The rest of that is because we are believers who we need to fight and stand up for just causes.
Yeah.
Like that's why we're so strong on life, on against the gender affirming, nonsense that we didn't have to deal with growing up. But again, and I know your children are older, but they're still going to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
But I'm also dealing with one in elementary school. I'm like, I'm going to have to be answering these questions.
Yeah.
One day, not necessarily of her, but like stuff around her. And I certainly can't vote for somebody that is going to be trying to instill that into children that age, and I think that's okay and appropriate. And
right.
It's just so I guess my question to you is, how do we respond to that crowd who's like, because yes, we should trust in the sovereignty of God, but that I don't view that as a passive. Just sit back and
there is no precedent in Scripture that saying trusting the sovereignty of God equals doing nothing.
Right.
Nothing. In fact, Hebrews 11:1, when it describes what faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction, the pragmaton of things unseen. That's where we get our word pragmatic from. It's a Greek root. Pragmaton means it does something. It works itself out. Meaning, if I trust the sovereignty of the Lord, I have to then do something. And the great example of that always comes to mind, because he's my number one hero, is George Mueller. Mueller believed that God answered prayer. And he was burdened by the fact that people in his church in Bristol, England, were anxious and worried and fretted. So what did Mueller do? Mueller adopted the ministry of orphan care to prove that God answers prayer. He didn't go after orphans because he believed orphans were number one on God's priority list. He went after orphans because he was burdened by the fact that people did not trust God to answer prayer. And so he chose the strategy of orphans and the supply and care for orphans by the means of prayer to show that God answers prayer. And so, therefore, his conviction led to action. He had to do something, meaning he had to choose orphans. He had to build homes. He had to hire staff. They had to prepare meals. And so there were things that they had to do to trust in the sovereignty of God, who gave prayer as a means for seeing the sovereignty of God played out in history. And so what I would simply say is, if people say, I just trust the sovereignty of God, I'm not going to do anything, I said, you really don't trust the sovereignty of God.
Right.
Trusting the sovereignty of God means doing the absolute best you can tactically with what you have and believing God for the outcome. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So in this instance, like, you got to look at the practical outcome of my decision making here. And again, we have a whole system. We could talk about the election system, but the idea that God's going to bless me doing nothing, I find no precedent for that in Scripture. And I would say, if anybody has that mentality, go, A, read your Bible through. 2, ask yourself the question, does God really bless that? And 3, I say get off your haunches and do something.
Right.
Do something. Make the best decision you possibly can. Invest in and participate in the system God has given us to operate within. And so please don't make the argument, I'm going to do nothing because I trust the sovereignty of God. I mean, you actually don't trust the sovereignty of God. Do something. Choose what you do through the lens of the Scriptures, but do something, right? Like, the gospel's not going to go forward by us just doing nothing, believing in the sovereignty of God. It goes forward through prayer, through going, through giving, through preaching the gospel, through healing what's broken, disrupting systems, and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom of Jesus Christ. There are things we have to do.
Right.
So I think that's huge. The second thing I want to say here that is very important, I think we have to be careful not to tie a vote for Trump or against Trump as being Christian or unchristian, or unchristian or Christian, right?
100%.
It's not, like, don't do that to God. We're having to live in the system God has placed us under. And I'm not going to say somebody's Christian for not voting, and I don't want anybody to say I'm unchristian for voting for Trump. Because there's no Scripture you can give me that tells me that, one. Number 2, I can make an argument in the opposite direction just as quickly and as easily. So I think we have to be careful not to tie votes for or not voting as Christian or non-Christian. So, and I don't think Christians should say it's a Christian thing to vote for Trump. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it's my practically best move as a citizen of this country now. But I'm not going to say it's innately Christian. I'm not going to give a Bible verse to justify myself.
Right.
And vice versa. So I think we have to be careful with that.
Yeah, no, that's part of the thing. I think that, and number one, I think that's really hurt the view of the church in general, the evangelical church. I would say it's been a big problem in the Southern Baptist Convention, because that's what's happening is we're proclaiming him as a Christian candidate.
Oh, yeah.
Or he is for the Christian people. And I don't think that's true.
Yeah.
I think he's for things that us as Christians support.
Yeah.
And that's a big difference there.
And as a businessman, he knows his audience.
Right.
Which I could make an argument, the man has played to the religious right better than anybody in the history of political candidates. And I don't know that he believes any of it. I'll be very honest with you. So I think as a businessman, he's read his audience well, and he's supplying a product that his audience wants. However, some of the product he supplies has been good for humanity.
Yeah. And Biden's camp has done the same thing
with the opposite,
with the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
And again, this is a man who vehemently was against gay marriage as a senator.
Yeah.
And I think even as a vice president candidate, I believe it, even in that time, was still very much against it. But again, it's and to the
and not to say that a man can't change their opinion. He's welcome to change his opinion. Right. He may have grown in his understanding of things. I just think he's grown backward. He's devolved.
He has, and then done the same thing with the minority community, with the African American community, because we've connected Trump with white nationalists. So that therefore, if you're not that, or you're the people that those people are against, then you got to vote with us.
Yeah.
And it's, it's sad, but that's just what it is. I mean, that's what these election cycles are. It's manipulating your audience and understanding your target audience in a way that your rhetoric is influencing them to a decision.
100%. And I tell you how that's worked in the opposite direction is minority audiences now are actually saying, now you guys understand that they can railroad anybody. They've been railroading us for hundreds of years. And now they've railroaded one of y'all. Now you get it.
Right.
And now I'll vote for you because you understand being railroaded. And so I think that's where it's played against the Democrat Party is like, you railroaded one of your own. Mm-hmm. And now so we're with you. I, honest to God, think that has shifted a lot of minority votes. Yeah. And I could be wrong, but I've actually heard that on newscasts and other platforms. And I would say, by the way, I want to encourage people to stop getting your news from major outlets.
Yes.
You're going to have to get on the podcast. You're going to have to get in social media, and you're going to have to filter and listen and use your biblical worldview, use your discernment, and sound out some things, because you are not going to get what you need on your major networks. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. CNN and Fox News should not be your primary source for anything.
Because Fox is even censoring information they don't want you to have, because there are things that if you have it, it's going to affect their power structure. Same with CNN, which is why those networks get rid of certain people like Chris Cuomo. Like, how did all of a sudden Chris Cuomo sound like a conservative? Because he had to leave. Like, if you're not listening to, Cuomo's like, hey, where did you come from? He's like, well, I had to leave because they wanted me to be a mouthpiece for this. Carlson, I'm fascinated with Tucker Carlson. I know there are people who don't like him who are Christians, and I've yet to have a good answer. It's like, tell me why you don't like him. I'm not saying he's 100% right. I'm not saying he's 100% holy. What I am saying is, here's a man who's trying to work out as a person who's newly found and understood what it means to be a Christian. He's trying to work out his faith with fear and trembling, and it's very salty and ugly, but it's legitimate, and it's real, and the things he's saying, his experience, need to be listened to, pay attention to, because that leads me to my third observation, and this is the last thing I'm going to say unless I get off on a tangent, but there are bigger issues than the presidency as a nation we have to deal with. The fact of the matter is, this is a problem. It's a hole in our game. We know, if you know your American history, this system of government is an experiment on the world stage, and we're just a couple hundred years into this experiment. And it's one of the things we talk. Our documents talk about a more perfect union. We're still figuring out what a more perfect union looks like. We're not there yet. And there are holes in our game. And one of the holes in our game I hear from people in agencies, 3-letter agencies in our government, is this reality. The president is a 4-year employee, maybe 8 at max. We are lifers. We started our career here, we're going to end here, meaning all those 3-letter agencies just have to wait out this president. That's a problem, because what we're finding is it's those people with black budgets, those people who are lifers, who are setting policy and ramrodding it through the legislative, judicial, and executive branch. Now, if that's news for people who are listening to this, your head's buried in the sand. Because the truth of the matter is, people who are leaving the establishments and coming out of that stuff are telling the stories now because they've been working in it. Yeah. And so what needs to happen is there are bigger issues in the presidency, and by I think what is beginning to happen is a soft revolution. Without firing shots, people are recognizing this, they know this, and they're demanding candidates who are not part of the swamp, who are willing to risk their lives to go in and clean things up. That's one of the things I admire about RFK, is that RFK knows he's a complete outsider, which is why they hate him. And I wish I could vote for him, but I can't. But Trump's an outsider, which is why they had to get him. And he kind of turned into an insider when he got in. I think he recognizes that. But I'm not so honest to God, Chris. That's why they're trying to get rid of him. Right. And this has come across as conspiracy to people, but all conspiracy is somebody who's 6 years ahead of the facts until the facts come out and it's, oh, you were right. Not all, but by and large, I think that's true. And so we have bureaucrats who are lifers who just have to wait out a president. What we need is a shift in our government where those people aren't allowed to get in and stay.
Especially in Congress.
Especially in Congress.
But you're right.
The CIA forced the Bay of Pigs on JFK. That's a fact. And anybody don't know that, you need to go back and do your history. The CIA forced Bay of Pigs on JFK because they wanted a war in Vietnam. And when they couldn't get it out of him, they killed him. That's a bottom line. We know that, which is, oh, by the way, if this is a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, why are there classified documents? They're mine.
Oh, yeah.
They should not be classified. This is my government. Show me those documents. And the reason I want you to show them is because it exposes who's pulling the strings. And so they know this reality. And I know it's going to flip people out and think we're nuts, but these are just facts. And most of us have lived our lives with our head in the sand, thinking the wrong things. And we have change that needs to be made in our government. Sometimes that's painful. And so hopefully we can do that without really, really hard things, by exercising our freedom to vote putting people in who have practical policies, who are for the good of our country. So that's a lot. We've dumped a lot on people, and I feel like my soul feels cleaner for having said things that you and I talk about in the office.
It feels dirty because we have to talk about, because the whole thing is messed up.
Yeah.
But feel cleaner talking about it.
I feel like my soul has unburdened itself by saying those things. But man, I just want to encourage people, get out and look at those things. And so if you don't have any other thoughts, it might be time for some Hayes takeaways.
Let's do it. Number one, presidents are not saviors. All of them are flawed. None of them are going to put Christ or you above all else. So stop trying to make Christianity fit into political parties and elections when Christ is way too big for that. Number two, don't lose your witness over your strong political views, and more important, how you choose to share and discuss those views with others.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying don't discuss politics, but if you can't do it in a way that's without hurting who you represent, don't do it.
Yeah, that's good.
Number three, you are not who you vote for, and who you vote for doesn't mean you agree or support everything they are, have done, stand for, or will say or do.
That's right.
So,
man, that's good.
And that's not necessarily for most of our listeners, I think, get that, but just for everybody out there, also don't judge someone else for who they vote for.
Amen.
That doesn't mean that they are in sync with that person.
Amen.
And lastly, and I think we've said this over and over again, but it's so important, pray for our leaders, pray for our country, and most importantly, for the gospel to go forward, for it to shatter hearts and turn people to Jesus. Because ultimately, no matter who's in command, that should be the prayer.
Yeah.
That should never change, no matter who's there. We pray for the gospel to go forward, for the kingdom to advance here, because America is not a Christian nation as much as we want to say it is.
Right.
There are Christians here, but we need a lot of work just like we do throughout the globe. And so just continue to pray for that no matter who's in control.
It's good, man. Thank you. Guys, hey, we appreciate you listening. We imagine some of this is probably going to be challenging for some of you, and probably, even some of the way we said it may be challenging for some of you, but that's completely okay. We have to get used to that kind of ability to engage on these difficult things. So we hope you'll listen. We hope you'll listen with open heart and mind. We're not beyond feedback and criticism. So if you have any thoughts you'd like to share with us, and we can come back and share and unpack questions, we're glad to do that, because that's part of what we're hoping to do, is get us thinking, applying our theology in the public square of our homes, our city, and our world, because we have to be beyond just like heaven out there somewhere, because the reality is God is redeeming all of creation, and he does that through hard things in history and time and space, and we're part of that, so we have to be involved. And so we hope that we're on the right track. We also recognize we can grow in 100 ways, so please send us an email, theologyinthedirt@gmail.com, if you have a question. We would love to be able to address it. If you have any thoughts, anything you'd like to hear from us, please share it. Check us out, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, all that stuff. theologyinthedirt.com, that's all available for you. We appreciate you listening, and until next time, out.